And this idea of all of this government intervention actually inverting timeless economic wisdom, right? Holding cash for a rainy day. That's what cash is, basically your buffer against uncertainty. But if you get this recurrent government intervention that's always bailing you out, then you end up like the airline holding no cash. You start penalizing prudence ultimately. Like if you're a prudent business operator holding cash, well, your competitors that get bailed out, you as well, they will outcompete you for being less prudent. It's madness.
And
Um,
this actually extends internationally as well. And it goes back to the philosophical question of was this inevitable based on the order of technologies? Because let's
mm,
say you have two countries that are not on friendly terms. And one of them is like, we're going to practice fiscal prudence and austerity
mhm,
and let recessions play out. And the other one's like, no, no, we're going to like shortcut recessions. So let's say there's some sort of external shock happens.
mhm,
There's both countries encounter recessions. One of them gets over it quicker because they print money.
mhm,
Well, they're at military advantage compared to the other one.
mhm.
And so at least in the short term, basically long term only works if you actually get to the long term.
Yeah,
If the other one prints and buys the commodities, they can actually, the funny is they can, if some country's doing austerity and another country is not, and they print a lot of money and buy a lot of commodities, they
right,
can push inflation onto the country that's, trying to be more prudent and be more market oriented
right.
anyway. Um,
And as
and
long as
so
they
one,
have captive audiences and capital controls to restrict people, because the people getting inflated would want to get out. But if they
yes,
can impose that restriction, then it works.
yes, yes, and then both countries end up with inflation. Maybe the one country has more inflation, but they also have more stuff that they got
Yeah.
quickly before that inflation really kicked in. And so I think that goes back to the question of, out of 200 countries, why don't you see a gold standard today? Why don't you see, the countries doing this? Why did no one kind of stick to their guns on this? And it's because the incentive structure of the order of technology that we encountered, the fact that commerce moved more quickly than money,
Yes.
just opened up so many both internal country by country arbitrage and then inter-country arbitrage,
Right.
so that even a group of people that wanted to do the quote unquote right thing would have a hard time doing it. I think there's a quote from the humorist Jack Handy that goes something like, I can imagine a world with like no war, and I can imagine us attacking that world because they'd never expect it. And it's like I can imagine like this a country that like stuck to the gold standard this whole time and it was like
Yeah.
super prudent. And I can imagine us like printing money and like buying all the oil and giving them inflation anyway, because
Right.
what are they going to do? And so it's just this environment is, it's kind of, it was asking for it just because of the order of the way the technology developed. And it's
Mhm.
unfortunate in many ways, obviously, especially if you were not at the center of the system, if you were not in the United States, if you're not in Europe, if you're one of the billions of people living under, half the world lives under authoritarianism
Right.
according to Freedom House. Billions of people live in they have emerging market currencies that every generation or so or every 2 generations get hyperinflated.
Yeah.
um, and so if you're in those environments, the fact that it turned out like this is terrible. Is both the accident of history and it's the to some extent the ordering of technology that we encountered and then the game theory that arose around that.
Yeah. It's a superb point. And I wonder if it's related to another guest of mine made this point with it's in the Twilight of Gold series that fiat currency sort of makes your domestic monetary policy vulnerable to the monetary policy of your craziest neighbor. So, for
Yeah,
instance, if you start debasing currency to wage war and you're that honest, austere, free banking society, well, they're probably going to kick your ass because their war chest is the savings of the whole civilization, right? They can hyperinflate basically and confiscate all that wealth to wage war. Whereas your war chest, if you're an honest government, you would just have your own balance sheet, basically. So it's weird. There's this weird, I guess, accident of history, as you call it, that somehow commerce outpaced the money. Then we sped up money, but at the cost of speeding up money, we introduced a lot of counterparty risk, arbitrage risk,
yep.
whatever you want to call it, the corruption of money. And then that leads to all of this band-aid and duct tape putting all this stuff back together. And man, what a weird What a weird thing we've just been through the past 150 years.